Did you know that No Time to Die almost didn't happen at all? After Daniel Craig's infamous "slash my wrists" comment following Spectre, Barbara Broccoli had to spend 2 years convincing him to return. But here's the kicker. The film we eventually got went through not one, not two, but 3 different directors, multiple script rewrites, and a global pandemic. One decision after another, and suddenly we had the most polarizing Bond film in franchise history. When No Time to Die finally hit theaters in 2021, fans expected redemption after the lukewarm reception of Spectre. The promise was clear: give Daniel Craig's Bond the send-off he deserved. But despite stunning action sequences and Craig's committed performance, something fundamental went wrong. The film that was supposed to unite Bond fans instead divided them like never before. So what exactly happened behind the scenes? How did a franchise with 60 years of experience create such a controversial finale? Today we're diving deep into the production chaos, creative battles, and questionable choices that made No Time to Die feel less like a celebration and more like a funeral. The director disaster. The problems with No Time to Die started long before cameras rolled. In 2018, Danny Boyle, the visionary behind Trainspotting and Slumdog Millionaire, was attached to direct. His pitch? A present-day Russia setting explores Bond's origins. Sounds intriguing, right? Well, not according to Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. After months of development and pre-production work, including elaborate sets built in Canada, Boyle suddenly departed due to creative differences, but leaked reports suggested the real issue was far more specific. Boyle wanted to cast Thomas Cott as the main villain, but the producers had other plans. They had already committed to bringing back Blofeld and wanted a more traditional Bond villain approach. Enter Cary Joji Fukunaga, who became the first American director to helm an official Bond film. But here's where it gets messy. Fukunaga essentially had to start from scratch. All of Boyle's work was scrapped, those expensive Canadian sets were abandoned, and the script needed a complete overhaul. This last-minute change pushed the release date back and set the tone for a production plagued by indecision. The film we got bears the scars of this directorial chaos. You can almost feel the creative tension between wanting to honor Craig's legacy while also setting up future storylines. It's a movie trying to be too many things at once, a consequence of having multiple visions fighting for screen time. The script doctor syndrome. When your film needs 4 credited screenwriters plus additional uncredited rewrites, you know there's a problem. No Time to Die went through more script doctors than a hypochondriac. Neil Purvis and Robert Wade started the process. Danny Boyle's collaborator John Hodge took a swing, Scott Z. Burns added his touch, and finally, Phoebe Waller-Bridge was brought in for dialogue polish. But here's the thing about script doctoring. When you have too many cooks in the kitchen, the recipe becomes a mess. Each writer brought their own vision, their own interpretation of what Bond should be. The result? A screenplay that feels like it was written by a committee with character motivations that shift depending on which writer's influence is strongest in any given scene. Take Safin's motivation, for example. Is he seeking revenge against Spectre? Does he want to play God with humanity? Is he obsessed with Madeline? The film never quite decides, and that's because different drafts probably emphasize different aspects of his character. What we're left with is a villain who feels unfocused and underdeveloped. Phoebe Waller-Bridge was specifically brought in to add humor and strengthen the female characters, which explains why Paloma's brief appearance feels so much more vibrant than anything else in the film. However, her influence seems limited to specific scenes, rather than informing the overall tone of the movie. The COVID Catastrophe. Just when the production thought they were in the clear, 2020 happened. No Time to Die became the poster child for pandemic delays, getting pushed back 3 separate times. Originally scheduled for November 2019, then February 2020, then April 2020, and finally landing in October 2021. These delays weren't just inconvenient, they were financially devastating. MGM and Universal had already spent $66 million on marketing for the April 2020 release. Every delay meant starting the marketing campaign over again, burning through money and losing momentum. By the time the film finally reached theaters, some estimates put the total cost at over $350 million. But the real damage was psychological. Bond films rely on anticipation and cultural moment building. The constant delays turned excitement into exhaustion. By October 2021, No Time to Die felt less like a triumphant return and more like homework you've been putting off for too long. The pandemic also affected the viewing experience itself. Many fans watched the film in masks in partially filled theaters, which hardly created the communal Bond experience that made these films feel like cultural events. The energy just wasn't there. The Blofeld Blunder. Let's talk about one of the film's most baffling creative decisions, how they handled Ernst Stavro Blofeld. After finally securing the rights to use the character and positioning him as Bond's ultimate nemesis in Spectre, No Time to Die essentially throws him away in a single scene. Christoph Waltz's Blofeld appears for maybe 10 minutes total, imprisoned in Belmarsh, only to be accidentally killed by nanobots that Bond unknowingly carries. It's almost insulting to both the character and the actor. Here's a villain with 60 years of history, played by an Oscar winner, and he dies from what amounts to a handshake gone wrong. The film tries to justify this by having Blofeld orchestrate the ambush at Vesper's grave from prison, but it's never properly explained how he managed to coordinate an international terrorist operation from a maximum security facility. Did he have a smartphone hidden in his cell? Was he communicating through interpretive dance during therapy sessions? The movie simply doesn't care to explain. The casual disposal of Blofeld feels symptomatic of the film's larger problem. It's more interested in clearing the deck for whatever comes next than honoring what comes before. It's narrative housekeeping masquerading as storytelling. The family drama forced feeding. Perhaps no element of No Time to Die feels more forced than Bond's instant fatherhood. The film reveals that James has a 5-year-old daughter with Madeleine Swan, and we're expected to immediately care about this relationship despite having zero emotional investment in it. Here's the problem. The film does nothing to make us understand what kind of father Bond would be, or why this child matters to him beyond basic biological obligation. We get one scene of him running through Safin's lair with a stuffed bunny, and suddenly we're supposed to feel the emotional weight of him sacrificing his life for a family we just met. Compare this to how the MCU handled Tony Stark's relationship with his daughter Morgan. We saw their bond develop over multiple films, watched him struggle with the balance between heroism and fatherhood, and understood why she mattered to him. No Time to Die gives us none of that groundwork and expects the same emotional payoff. The film also struggles with Madeleine herself. Léa Seydoux is a talented actress, but she and Daniel Craig have no chemistry whatsoever. Their relationship feels clinical, more like two actors hitting their marks than two people in love. When the film's emotional climax depends on us believing Bond would rather die than never touch these people again, that lack of chemistry becomes fatal. The action sequence inconsistency. Now don't get me wrong, No Time to Die has some spectacular action sequences. The opening Norway chase, the Cuba party infiltration, and the final assault on Safin's Island are all expertly crafted, but they feel disconnected from each other, like they belong in different movies. The Cuba sequence in particular feels like it wandered in from a different, much better Bond film. Ana de Armas brings more energy and charm to her 10 minutes of screen time than most of the main characters manage in nearly 3 hours. This scene works because it understands what Bond is supposed to be: thrilling, fun, and a little absurd. However, the film then immediately pivots back to its dreary meditation on mortality and family legacy. It's tonal whiplash that suggests the filmmakers couldn't decide whether they were making a traditional Bond adventure or a serious character study about the cost of violence. The final island assault borrows heavily from classic Bond formulas: the villain's elaborate base, the countdown to destruction, the army of disposable henchmen, but it's executed with such grim seriousness that it loses the playful quality that made those old films entertaining. When Roger Moore infiltrated Karl Stromberg's underwater base in The Spy Who Loved Me, there was a sense of adventure. When Craig infiltrates Safin's Island, it feels like he's doing chores. The franchise future fumble. For all the talk about No Time to Die being Daniel Craig's swan song, the film seems oddly uncertain about what comes next for the franchise. They introduced Lashana Lynch as the new 007, build her up as Bond's potential successor. They have her hand the number back to him without ever really exploring what her version of the role might look like. Lynch is a charismatic performer who could absolutely carry her own spy franchise, but the film keeps her firmly in Bond's shadow. She gets a few good scenes, particularly her introduction in Jamaica, but she never feels like a character in her own right. She's more of a plot device, someone to remind us that the world has moved on while Bond has retired. The film had an opportunity to genuinely explore what it means to pass the torch from one generation to the next. Instead, it plays it safe by killing off Craig's Bond or promising that James Bond will return. But if Bond is dead, who exactly is returning? His spirit? A new actor playing the same character in a different timeline? The film raises these questions without bothering to answer them. What did you think of No Time to Die? Did it work as Daniel Craig's farewell, or did the problems outweigh the positives? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into movie disappointments. This video is made by movie fans, for movie fans.